So I am a fifth generation native New Yorker. Uh, yes, and while there is definitely something cool about that, there is also actually a downside. Like there was this moment, when it occurred to me that while, many other American families also, first landed in New York City, for the most part, at some point, they kept going, pioneering their way west with little more than the rags on their backs and all of that. When meanwhile, it's like my own family got off a boat, took two steps, looked around, and were like, good enough for me, forever. It's like I come from a place where, discovering the great unknown means New Jersey. All right, well, it didn't take me too long to realize that the reason for all of this was mostly fear. And that fear, pervaded everything. Where you live, what you do for a living, it's like you just find the first, solid thing, and you don't risk going any further. But as it turned out, my mother was something of a pioneer herself, although not without her share of false starts. All right, so at 20 years old, she had hardly been outside of Brooklyn. And when she did finally leave a year later, it was only because she married a guy from Queens, which she then called the country. Anyway, they had a baby, me, but by the time I was 2, they had divorced, and to make a little extra money afterwards, she had to take on a weekend job cleaning apartments. So the very first was this duplex, filled with antiques and artwork and Manhattan skyline views. But as it winds up, it would be her last, because over the course of 1 year, she would go from being the cleaning lady to the secretary to the girlfriend of the multimillionaire who owned it, named Mark. So they never wound up living together full time. For one, they were both divorced, and so it was just kind of a, been there, done that. But also, my mother had this philosophy, which was just that if you take somebody's money, you have to take their advice. And so when it came to raising me, she wanted to do it her way, which she felt like had to be on her dime. So she would go on to spend every weekend with him, and then every weekday back home in Queens, living this dual life for the next 22 years. And on the weekends when I wasn't with my dad, I was right there with her. And so together, my mother and I had kind of become this super women, able to jump social strata in a single bound. All right. So because of my mother's plan, my life was really never very different than anybody else's around me. And I wasn't like, sent to some special school or moved to a penthouse. And so I just kind of grew into your typical Queens teenager. I was a walking cliche, right? And every other way, except for the fact that I still spent every odd weekend talking and talking with this brilliant art collecting, croquet playing man at his mansion in Bridgehampton. And when I say talking and talking with him, I actually really mean it. Like, I don't just mean we just sort of made some chit chat. I mean that after dinner, every odd Saturday for 20 years of my life, he would look at me and ask me some enormous question, something like, example, if I were to tell you that the universe was infinite, how would that make you feel? And for that one, I was 5 years old, right? But I just lived for it. And we would just talk and talk, and sometimes my mother would kind of leave us to it, and then she would kind of come back in an hour later, and she would be like, are you two going to talk about the moon and the stars all night? And that's actually what she came to call them, our moon and stars talks. Okay, so by 16 years old, like every other teenager, I didn't want to be away from my friends for 5 minutes, let alone a whole weekend. And so for the first time, I decided to ask Mark if they could come along. So I give him a call, ring, Mark speaking. Hey, it's Tara. Would it be okay if I brought some friends this weekend? Yeah, that'd be fine. Click. He wasn't one for small talk, right? So, problem wasn't him. The problem was that some of my friends had no idea about any of this. Now, it really wasn't that I was trying to hide it. It's just that the details weren't always easy to slip into conversation. Truly, the only thing I could compare having to tell them, about all this stuff to is just kind of like my own coming out, Like I'd sit them down and I'd be like, I have something to tell you, and I hope you find it in your heart to accept me, but I know a rich guy. Right? But truly, I wanted them to come. I didn't want them to be embarrassed, so I knew that I sort of had to explain some things to them, And so literally here I am in the schoolyard one day at recess, and it's like in one corner, kids are just beating the crap out of each other. It's how we do recess in Queens, right? And in the other corner, I have just, I've pulled aside my friend who I've invited, Lynette, and I'm just sitting there and I'm trying to explain to her, what it means to go antiquing. Right? But before you know it, there we are, right? Me, Lynette, her boyfriend Rob, piled into this little red Civic, and we're flying down the highway, heading from Hollis to here, to the Hamptons. And just, for brevity's sake, we'll say Lynette's like Rosie Perez, Rob's like Eminem, right? They're in the front, I'm in the back. And and as we're getting closer, I'm getting more and more nervous, and I'm trying to think of everything I haven't explained, and I'm just like, oh my God, did I tell you about the ketchup? And the ketchup. I'm like, listen, you can't put the ketchup bottle on the table. You got to take the ketchup out of the bottle. You got to put it in a little bowl with a spoon. Don't ask. And then, I'm just keep getting nervous, and I'm more things. And I'm like, oh, I got another one. I forgot to tell you guys. Listen, there's no TV there, And they're like, dear God, what does he do all day, All right, so that kind of led me to explain what we did after dinner, which wasn't watch TV, it was the talks, the Moon and the Stars talks, right? And so I should have said, while I loved these talks, they actually were not for the faint of heart, meaning, Mark didn't care if you were some kid unaccustomed to this kind of thing. He was going to talk and argue with you like you were his peer and fully expect you to keep up. And I just didn't know if my friends were going to be into that or if he was going to be into them. But before you know it, too late, there we are, pulling into the driveway. So the most shocking thing you first saw at Mark's house actually was not the beautiful hand-laid stone pool or this enormous regulation croquet court or even the historic farmhouse. It was just Mark himself. He was 6'10". Yeah, 6'10", right? So here are these two kids from Queens, is that a man or is that oak tree wearing chinos, All right, so likely because everyone completely ignored my stupid paranoia and were just themselves, the day went without a hitch. But after dinner that night, when I knew the questions were coming, I couldn't help but to be a little bit nervous, again. And then, of course, he just goes for it. He looks up at them and he's like, so, if we were to presume we could fix all of the societal ills right here and now, where would you begin? Go. Come on, right? I mean, you guys gotta understand. Nobody is asking us these kinds of questions, right? And even though we are at an age where you might be starting to think bigger picture, you might be starting to think about what you want to do for a living, it's like we come from a world where it only ever felt like there were two job options. It was cop, not a cop, what else could there be, really, Just meaning, really, that sort of like your parents, you took the first solid city job that came along and you held on for dear life and you were proud and you did your best and you did it forever, right? So solving society's ills, but So of course, as soon as he says it, I kind of look down, I take this breath. And then I hear Lynette say something. And I look up, and now Rob has disagreed with her. And now Mark is sort of nodding along. And just like that, it's on. And not just that one time. Most of these friends would come back for many more of these talks over the years. And while in a way it was this beautiful thing, of course, right? In another way, it was a little bit sad, because what most of them would tell you now is that those talks forever changed the way we thought of ourselves. You know, they really made you think that maybe there was a little more to you than you knew. And for some, certainly not all, but definitely for me, you know, they even made you think, like, boy, you know, if A, I like talking about these big things, and B, the universe is infinite, then C, there's got to be some more job options than bus driver, you know? But truly, I think this experience gave us something that, unfortunately, I know my parents didn't have, and that's just when we came to that crossroads in life, the next couple of years, we had the confidence to know that we had a choice. And so today, I live in a whole other world, Manhattan. A whopping 20 minutes away from where I grew up, but you know, that's not because of fear, that's my choice. Thank you.